Sarah Jenkins had a mind for machines and a heart for history. From the moment she could hold a wrench, she was at her grandfather's side, learning the inner workings of old cars, tractors, and the dusty, forgotten relics he kept in his barn. She grew up with the smell of grease and oil in her nose and the feel of cold steel in her hands. Now, at 28, she was an expert mechanic on a military base, a place that felt both like a dream come true and a constant battle. Her latest project was a passion, a meticulously restored M26 Pershing tank, the very same kind her grandfather had served on in the last days of the war. She knew every bolt, every weld, every nuance of its massive 90mm main gun. She could feel its power just by standing next to it. The Pershing was the centerpiece of the annual Battle for Ardennes reenactment, a huge event that drew thousands of spectators and some of the best historical reenactment groups from all over the country. But despite her skill, the respect she'd earned from the wrenches and spanners, she couldn't get the same respect from the men in uniform. The tank crew, a group of young, cocky men led by Captain Miller, saw her as nothing more than the grease monkey. Miller, with his perfectly pressed uniform and a smile that never reached his eyes, was the worst of them. He was a showman, not a soldier, and he treated Sarah's hard work like it was an afterthought. "Jenkins," he'd say, leaning against the tank's hull, hands on his hips, "did you make sure the ammo racks are polished? We don't want to give those German fellas any reason to laugh." He'd say it with a chuckle, and his crew would join in. The German fellas he was talking about were the Panzerabteilung, a reenactment group that prided themselves on their historical accuracy, especially their two massive, fearsome Tiger I tanks. The Tigers were the kings of the reenactment field, their thick armor and 88mm guns famous for dominating every event. The Panzerabteilung leader, a man named Klaus, had the same arrogant grin as Miller, only with an old-world German confidence. The day before the event, Sarah was hunched inside the Pershing's turret, making a final check on the gun's firing mechanism. It was a beautiful, complicated piece of machinery. The real Pershing hadn't gotten to Europe in time to see much action against the Tigers, but in this reenactment, it was going to be the main show. Sarah had a plan. She knew the Pershing was faster, more agile, and its gun could match the Tigers. But her plan meant nothing if she wasn't in command. Miller walked up to the tank, his voice echoing in the hollow space. "Jenkins, what are you doing in there? I told you to finish that oil change." "I'll handle the gun, Captain," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm as she slid out. The hydraulic recoil system needed a small adjustment. "And if you want the best accuracy, you should let me fire. I can get it to hit a target the size of a teacup at 500 yards. Miller's laughter was loud and cold. "You firing the main gun? That's rich. This isn't some carnival game, Jenkins. The Pershing needs a man at the helm." His crew snickered. Sarah's face remained a stone. "The Pershing needs someone who knows what they're doing, Captain." He ignored her, patting the tank's barrel as if it were a pet. "Don't worry. The Germans will laugh at our Pershing's paint job, not its gunnery. I've got this." And then, just as if on cue, a deep rumbling shook the ground. The two Tiger tanks, massive and menacing, rolled onto the field, their black crosses stark against the gray paint. Klaus stood in the turret of the lead Tiger, a cigar clamped between his teeth, and looked at the American crew. He saw the Pershing, a proud but smaller machine. He saw Miller preening, and he saw Sarah covered in a thin layer of grease, standing off to the side. He raised his hand in a wave, a theatrical, friendly gesture. Then he let out a laugh, a deep rumbling sound that carried across the field. His crew joined in. They were not laughing at the Pershing. They were laughing at the little girl who had put it back together. The sound of their laughter followed Sarah all the way back to her workshop. It was a cold, sharp sound that cut deeper than any of Miller's words. It made a knot form in her stomach. She knew she could prove them all wrong. She just needed a chance. The day of the reenactment was a beautiful, clear morning. The sun shone down on the green fields, and thousands of spectators lined the fences, their cameras ready. The event was famous for its realism, and the air was thick with excitement. For Sarah, the day was torture. She was stuck in a small tent behind the main staging area, making sure the radios were working, cleaning the smaller guns, and helping the crew with their uniforms. She was a spectator to her own creation. She watched from a small television monitor as Miller, in full uniform and with a smug smile, stood on the tank's deck, waving to the crowd. He was in his element, a showman from head to toe. The Pershing, gleaming and powerful, looked perfect. But Sarah knew what was inside. She knew Miller had a loose wire on the radio that would cut out at the worst possible moment. She knew he hadn't checked the oil pressure properly. She had tried to tell him, but he'd simply waved her away. The battle began. Blanks were fired. Smoke bombs billowed, and the sound of cannons boomed across the fields. The first hour was all action. The American forces, made up of a few jeeps and armored half-tracks, advanced. The German forces, with their two menacing Tigers, held the high ground. Miller's Pershing was in the middle of the American attack. He was trying to be the hero, charging forward, calling out orders over the radio. But his swagger was getting in the way of his tactics. The German Tigers, led by Klaus, were too smart. They let Miller get too far ahead of the other American forces, drawing him into a trap. Captain Miller to HQ, came a crackle over the radio. We are going to flank the enemy from the east. We'll show them how it's done. Sarah watched the monitor, her stomach clenched. The Tigers were in a perfect ambush position. She grabbed a radio. Captain Miller, turn back. They're waiting for you. Use the trees for cover. There was a burst of static. The radio went dead. Miller must have moved and jostled the loose wire. He was on his own. The German Tigers, with their powerful 88mm guns, opened fire. Their shots were perfect. The first Tiger shot hit a truck right next to the Pershing. A huge cloud of smoke and noise erupted. Miller, inside the tank, was disoriented. The second Tiger shot hit a half-track, knocking it out of the fight. The American forces were pinned down, and the Tigers were about to descend. Laughter, loud and confident, came over the German radio channel. Sarah could hear it from the tent. It was Klaus. He was laughing again. This wasn't a mock battle for him. It was a chance to show the power of his beloved Tigers. And he was winning just like he always did. He was laughing at the Pershing and at the man in charge of it. Miller was in trouble. His tank was exposed and his radio was dead. He couldn't see the second Tiger coming up behind him. Panic crept into his voice as he tried to yell commands to his crew, but his voice was drowned out by the noise of the battle. The Pershing was vulnerable. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She had put everything into this tank, and now it was about to be destroyed because of a man's pride. She watched Klaus's Tiger begin to move, preparing to close in for the final, humiliating strike. The American forces were retreating, and the crowd was silent, holding their breath. This wasn't a show anymore. This was a disaster, and Sarah, from her small tent, felt a cold knot of anger in her chest. She had to do something. She couldn't just stand by and watch. She ran out of the tent, pushing through the people, her eyes fixed on the Pershing. This was her tank, and it was about to be humiliated in front of the world. And she was going to stop it. Sarah's sprint across the field felt like an eternity. The ground shook with the roar of the tanks. Spectators stared at her, a lone figure in dirty overalls, running toward the chaos. The Pershing was at a standstill, its gun aimed in the wrong direction. Miller's panic was visible even from a distance, as he leaned out of his commander's hatch, yelling useless orders at his crew. Klaus's Tiger was in position now, its massive gun staring right at the Pershing's side. In the world of reenactments, this was the moment of truth. A single hit here would knock the Pershing out of the battle and end its day in shame. The spectators, who had been holding their breath, began to murmur. They knew this was the end of the line for the American tank. Captain Miller, you need to turn the turret, now, Sarah yelled, her voice hoarse from the running and the smoke, but he couldn't hear her over the noise. He was too busy yelling at his radio man, trying to fix the dead line. He wasn't a commander. He was a man falling apart under pressure. Sarah didn't hesitate. She scrambled up the side of the tank, her hands and feet finding purchase on the cold, hard steel. She ignored the shouts from the field organizers and the surprise of Miller's crew. She wasn't thinking. She was acting. She reached Miller's hatch and with a heave pulled herself inside. The inside of the tank was a mess of wires, blinking lights, and the panicked faces of the crew. Jenkins! What in the world are you doing? Miller screamed, his face red. This is a disgrace! Your radio is dead, and you're about to be a smoking hole in the ground, Sarah said, her voice like a steel whisper. "Move! Get out of my seat!" Her sudden, confident presence was a shock to everyone inside the tank. The driver, a young man named Tom, looked from Miller to Sarah, confused. The gunner, a nervous kid named Mike, froze, his hands hovering over the controls. "I'm the captain here! You'll be court-martialed for this!" Miller spluttered, but Sarah ignored him. She looked at the main gun's sights. She saw the Tiger, a monster of steel, moving slowly and confidently, and in her mind she saw a target the size of a teacup. She knew what to do. "Mike, get off the gun!" "Let me take it!" she commanded. Mike, sensing her authority, moved without a word. Sarah slid into the gunner's seat, her hands finding the controls as if they were an extension of her own body. She took a deep breath. She could hear the German laughter over the radio again, a chilling sound of victory. They were celebrating their win before they'd even fired the final shot. Miller lunged at her, trying to pull her from the seat. But Sarah was a rock. She braced herself against the controls and held firm. "Let me go, Captain. You're putting us all at risk." He didn't listen. In a desperate move, he reached for the main firing button, trying to get off a wild, useless shot. But Sarah saw it coming. She moved her arm, blocking his hand from the button. His hand slid past, his fingers finding the trigger guard instead of the button itself. In the struggle, his finger accidentally pressed the small hidden safety button. A light went red and the gun locked. The whole tank shuddered as the firing mechanism locked. The gun was useless. Miller froze, his eyes wide. He had just disabled the tank's main gun. His own pride and anger had done more damage than any German Tiger could have. Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with a cold rage. This man was not just a fool. He was a liability. She pushed him away with surprising strength, sending him sprawling into the small space behind her seat. He lay there, his pride shattered, his face pale with fear. The Tiger's gun began to turn, lining up the shot. This was it. The Pershing was about to be destroyed. Sarah looked at the sight, her hands trembling. She had one last chance. It was not a shot, but a sacrifice. She aimed the gun, not at the Tiger, but at the ground right in front of them. She would show them something they weren't expecting. She would show them the true power of this machine. She pressed the firing button. A thunderous roar erupted from the Pershing's barrel, not of a direct hit, but a blast of smoke and dust, creating a massive, blinding cloud right between the Pershing and the Tiger. The Pershing shuddered. The ground around the tank was instantly hidden in a thick, swirling cloud. The sound was deafening. The German tanker's laughter went silent. Klaus, in the turret of his Tiger, watched the American Pershing get ready for its final moments. He was savoring the victory. He had been laughing because he knew with all his heart that the young man in charge had no idea what he was doing. This was not a battle of tanks. It was a battle of skill and knowledge, and the Germans had both. He gave the order to fire. Then the unexpected happened. The Pershing's gun boomed, but it didn't hit them. Instead, a massive geyser of dirt and dust exploded between the two tanks, creating a thick, blinding screen. Klaus's heart pounded. He had never seen a tactical move like this in a reenactment. It was clever. It was brave. The laughter died on his lips. His gunner, a burly man named Hans, looked at him, confused. "What was that, sir?" "That," Klaus said, his voice low, "was a surprise. And it was smart." Inside the Pershing, the dust cloud was a perfect shield. Sarah's gamble had paid off. She could hear the shouts and curses from the German crew, their confusion a welcome sound. She didn't have a working main gun to fire anymore, not with the safety lock on. But she had a plan. "Tom, drive! Drive to the west, stay in the smoke!" she commanded, her voice calm and firm. Tom, the driver, didn't question her. He pushed the levers, and the Pershing lurched forward, its treads grinding the earth. "Mike, get on the machine gun! Fire at the base of that rock formation! Make them think we're still there!" Sarah ordered. Mike, the gunner, had been staring at her, his mouth open in awe. He nodded, and the machine gun began to chatter, a continuous loud sound that echoed through the dust cloud. The German crew would hear the sound and think they had them trapped. But Sarah's tank was moving. It was moving fast. The Pershing was lighter and faster than the heavy Tigers, and she was using that to her advantage. She had to. The German tankers were expecting a direct fight, but she was going to give them a ghost. As the Pershing emerged from the cloud of dust, Sarah had Tom drive it to a different position, a small ridge on the far end of the battlefield. It was a perfect spot. It was high enough to see over the terrain, but low enough that the tank was still hidden from sight by a few trees. From here, she could see both of the German Tigers now moving cautiously through the dust cloud, trying to find her. Klaus was a good commander, but he was used to fighting on his terms. He was used to his opponent being predictable. He expected the Pershing to have run away or to be waiting for him to clear the smoke. He didn't expect it to reappear from a new position. Sarah's radio, which she had quickly re-spliced with a quick move of her fingers, buzzed to life. She could hear the commanders on the field, confused and surprised. They were looking for the Pershing, and they couldn't find it. The announcer on the loudspeaker was silent, stunned. Miller was still in the back of the tank, his face pale and his breathing shallow. He looked at Sarah, at the crew following her orders, and at the screen showing the battlefield. He had lost control. "They're coming out of the smoke," Sarah said calmly. "Tom, prepare to move forward." "Mike, wait for my signal!" The Tigers emerged from the smoke, their guns still pointed at the spot where they thought the Pershing was. The first Tiger, Klaus's tank, had its side facing Sarah's new position. In a real battle, this was a deadly mistake. The Pershing's gun was more than capable of tearing through its side armor. Sarah's eyes narrowed. This wasn't a game to her. This was a chance to prove something. She was going to show them all. She waited. She watched as Klaus's Tiger turned its turret looking for her. He was getting frustrated. His confidence was cracking. "Now!" Sarah yelled. Tom drove the Pershing forward just a few feet, enough for the gun barrel to clear the trees. Mike, following her orders without question, fired the machine gun. The sound was loud and sharp, and it got Klaus's attention. He turned his turret just a few degrees, just enough for his gun to point right at the trees. Sarah had him. She knew that the main gun was useless, but she also knew how to make a target, and she knew how to use the Pershing speed. As Klaus's Tiger turned, Sarah had Tom pull the tank back behind the trees. It was a perfect fake-out. The German crew, thinking they had been ambushed, began to panic. Klaus, his face white, shouted orders at his driver. The second Tiger, seeing the first one get into trouble, began to move in. But it was too late. The Pershing was gone. The Germans had been outsmarted. They had been outmaneuvered not by a man, but by a woman, and they hadn't even seen her. The battle was over. The Pershing had not fired a single shot from its main gun, but it had won. It had outmaneuvered and outsmarted the Germans. It had made them look foolish. The crowd went wild. They hadn't seen a fight like this before. They had seen something new. When the tanks rolled back to the staging area, a crowd gathered around the Pershing. They wanted to see the man who had outsmarted the Germans. They wanted to see Captain Miller, but it was Sarah who climbed out of the hatch first, a little grease on her cheek, a wide smile on her face. Her crew, Tom and Mike, climbed out after her, looking at her with a new kind of respect. Miller, his face pale and his uniform now wrinkled, stumbled out last. He was a defeated man. The German crew, led by Klaus, approached the Pershing. Klaus looked from Miller to Sarah, and a slow grin spread across his face. It wasn't a laugh. It was a smile of respect. "You," he said, pointing a finger at Sarah, "you are the one. You are the one with the mind." Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "We have a good tank," she said, her voice a little shaky. "It is not the tank," Klaus said. "It is the tanker. You gave us a ghost, a true ghost." He extended his hand, and Sarah shook it. It was a firm, solid handshake. The German tanker's respect was the biggest prize of all. Then a field organizer, a retired general, approached. He had heard what had happened. He had heard about Sarah taking command of the tank and about Miller's foolishness. "Captain Miller," the general said, his voice cold. "I want an explanation for the breakdown of the gun," Miller stammered, his eyes darting back and forth. "It was a malfunction, sir. A technical failure." But Tom, the driver, stepped forward. "Sir, with all due respect, it wasn't. Captain Miller disabled the gun himself." Then Mike, the gunner, added, "He was trying to keep Sarah from helping us, sir." "She saved us," the crowd began to murmur. The general looked at Miller, his face a mask of disappointment. "Your reckless pride put your crew at risk. And you let her, a civilian, do the job you were too afraid to do." Miller looked down at his shoes, his shoulders slumping. He had been so sure of himself, so sure that he was better than her, that he had ended up exposing his own weakness. The general then turned to Sarah. "You, young lady, you are the reason that Pershing won today. You showed ingenuity, bravery, and a commitment to your team. That's what a leader is. What do you say? Would you like to be a gunner for real?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. For the first time, she felt seen. Her sacrifice, her hard work, her skill, it had all been worth it. She had found justice, not through revenge, but through her actions. A few weeks later, Sarah was at her new post, a promotion to a full-time gunner on a new, modern tank. She was respected now, not just for her work, but for who she was. She had earned her place. One day, she was working on her tank, a quiet smile on her face, when Klaus, the German reenactor, visited her. He held up a small object, a medal from his reenactment group. "For the ghost," he said. "You taught us a valuable lesson, Fraulein. It is not the machine, but the person who holds the power." Sarah took the medal, a small piece of steel with a tank on it. It was better than any trophy. It was respect. It was the end of a long, difficult road. It was a powerful, quiet moment of justice. The laughter was gone, replaced by the deep, silent respect of a fellow soldier.